Hello there, Alaskans, wherever you are. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show, coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska, where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Thank you, Scott. Hello, everybody, and welcome aboard Must Read Alaska, coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. Today, it is a beautiful day in South Central Alaska. The planes are flying around, and looks like we're going to get some more lightning strikes on the mountains over in the Talkeetna Mountains this afternoon. In fact, I think we're heading towards fire season. So for all the latest news, just be sure to go over to mustreadalaska.com and hit the subscribe button, pick up the newsletter there. Lots of great political content. And go to our YouTube channel. We're always posting there. On Facebook, we're at mustreadalaska.com, and you'll see tons of stuff going on Facebook. We run polls there, and we're just so glad you're able to join us today. But today we have a special guest, and I don't want to take up a lot of time before we get to Bryan Fisher, who's with the Division of Homeland Security with the state of Alaska, and he's joining us today. And Bryan, are you there on the other line with me?
I'm here. Pleasure to be with you, Suzanne.
Thank you for coming on with us today. Bryan, tell us about what your role is with the state of Alaska.
So thanks. So my regular job, I guess my day job, is as the acting director of the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. So we're the agency that manages all the kind of the disasters. You think fires and floods and earthquakes and those kind of things. But for the last year and a half, my second job, if you will, has been as one of the incident commanders for the state's COVID-19 Unified Command. So I've been in charge of getting us through this pandemic with the team at the Department of Health and Social Services.
And you've got, there's a lot going on with all of that. I mean, it's a big job to run disaster management stuff in the state, and it was a bit of a disaster because we didn't know even a year ago. I flew last year, and I tell you, the airports were desolate. There was nobody in them, and we didn't have enough information to quite manage it. We certainly didn't have the PPE, the personal protective equipment, the PPE that we needed. We didn't have, of course, all the advantages of the information that the experts have gathered for the whole year. And we were really running blind a little bit. So there was a lot going on. But in the meantime, I think one of the things we wanted to talk about today was that our cruise ship season last year was an absolute bust. And all of our cruise dependent economy towns are really still suffering. But we're really hoping for better things now. And I know you've been working on it. So tell listeners what you've been doing to try to restore the cruise season for Alaska.
So I think, then these conversations started really as early as March of 2020. Like you said, we really didn't know what was going to happen with respect to this pandemic. It was pretty clear that we had a lot to do. Things did get pretty rough around the globe and in the country and in the state. And unfortunately, the federal government issued what they called the no sail order. If you remember the Diamond Princess, there were some cruise ships that had a really bad time with serious COVID outbreaks and fatalities at the beginning of the pandemic. So the CDC shut down cruising essentially in the entire country. And since that happened, we have been, Governor Dunleavy's administration has been working with Southeast Alaska communities and industry to make ourselves all ready for the resumption of sailing once we get through this pandemic. So for the last year, we've been communicating quite a bit, the governor himself, the delegation, and us to CDC. And what we really said was, let us do what we do best here in Alaska. Let us manage the safety of our residents and workers and visitors. And kind of federal government, if you'd stay out of the way, we'd really appreciate that. So in the fall, the CDC lifted their no sail order and put in place a conditional sailing order, which really created a whole myriad of hoops that cruise lines had to go through in port communities to demonstrate that they would be able to resume sailing in a safe manner with the virus still out there. So we kind of led the effort, corralled the cruise line industries, port communities in Southeast Alaska, and the Alaska Travel Industry Association and their members that are the small kind of tourism entities in Southeast to come up with a plan to assist the cruise lines in making their application to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for what's called a conditional sailing certificate. And so we've been doing that, and we were just a couple of weeks ago successful. We got the very first agreement through all the hoops, signed with Norwegian Cruise Line and a number of Southeast communities and the Alaska Department of Health and Social Services. It was submitted just a couple of Fridays ago to CDC, and the cruise line is waiting to hear back on whether they get their permission to sail in August, which is what they're planning.
What did you have to do to get that? What does that agreement look like? What is does the communities have to put a bunch of hand sanitizer on the dock? What do you do?
All sorts of things that you can think of that we've been doing for the last year, from testing, cruise ship crew members and as well as passengers, all of the sanitization protocols, reduced capacities on the vessels. And then kind of similarly, like you just said, on the port side, kind of same thing. How are you going to keep the handrails and the restrooms at the docks clean? And how are you going to make sure that people can visit Alaska safely and kind of maintain social distancing and the whole mask wearing and all of those kind of aspects. The most important was really how we were going to figure out what to do if we saw COVID on a cruise ship. That was kind of the nightmare scenario last year.
Right,
so
right.
A lot of time goes into making sure the medical capacity on ships is available in case there are outbreaks, and then making sure there are agreements in place to take anybody that may get sick and need hospitalization to get them to shore and for us to get them out of those small communities that don't have a lot of hospital capacity to begin with.
Right. So let's take a look at someplace like Skagway. So Skagway, a very important port community for cruise ships. They get their 95% of their economy is based on cruise ship travel. And so it's about a 6-month-year economy, and the rest of the year they have a little bit of independent travel coming down from Canada, but of course none right now because the borders are closed. No motorcycles clubs are coming down from Whitehorse or the Yukon. And so they are obviously really hurting, but they also are in a situation where if they do have an outbreak in Skagway, there is no hospital. There's a little clinic there. I don't even know if there's a doctor. There might be a physician's assistant. But they also can't really fly people out of there all the time because of the weather. The weather is kind of rough in Southeast, and getting through Berners Bay I go this route pretty frequently, so I know it pretty well. Flying from Juneau through Berners Bay to Skagway, you can't always get through Berners Bay. Sometimes you're pinned down for a day or two. So tell us about that.
So I think, we've had lots of great conversations with Andrew Kermata, the mayor there. And I will say, kind of first and foremost, one of the things that we've been very focused on, and the governor has been focused on from the very beginning of this COVID, was the fact that economic health for our communities is just as important as kind of public health, medical health, if you will.
Sure it is.
So I think everybody's eager to resume here. And with the concerns that you just expressed, many of our small port communities in Southeast are in a similar boat. I think the big game changer for all of us has been vaccinations. So, and I'd say the good news, for example, the Norwegian Cruise Line agreement that we just signed a couple of weeks ago, that cruise line, in order to make it as safe as possible, made their own decision from the corporate level to require 100% vaccination of all crew members and guests that are going to come up here to sail to Alaska in August and September and October. And with that in mind, just the epidemiology, Dr. Ann Zink and Dr. Joe McLaughlin have reviewed the protocols, and they're feeling very comfortable that if there's that level of vaccination on a ship, and the communities in Southeast are doing a great job just vaccinating themselves locally, that we really don't expect to see anything. There may be 1 or 2 cases. We don't think people are going to get very sick. We don't think there are going to be outbreaks, but we can't just assume that. So what we did was, I think the cruise lines, a lot of the onus is on them, and Royal or Norwegian, for example, they really increased the on-ship medical care capacity, kind of the hospital ship capacity, to be able to treat patients on the ship without having to offload them in one of our port communities. With that said, they also have
interesting.
Yeah, they also have contingency.
Let me ask you about that for a second. So let's say you've got somebody who develops COVID, and maybe they've had a vaccine, so the that they develop of COVID isn't all that dire. They just need to be isolated. And so are they going to have sort of quarantine zones on the ships?
Yeah, so absolutely. They will be operating at a reduced capacity, and some of that is to just have a little more distance between the guests and the crew. But part of that is to have rooms available, staterooms on the vessels available to be able to isolate folks. And kind of the what we've seen with vaccinated folks, like you just said, is even if they do contract the disease, they don't get severely ill. So in many respects, it may be a case of just keeping them isolated in their cabin. The CDC recently released guidance that if you're vaccinated and you're coming into close contact with somebody who has COVID, you don't have to quarantine yourself. So that really was a game changer. But I think the other thing that almost every cruise line that we've talked to so far is planning on doing, if needed, is to isolate any passengers that become patients and really steam back to their home port of Seattle, which is an interesting thing that usually doesn't happen. And it wouldn't happen for things like heart attacks and broken arms and those kind of things. But for COVID, they've built the capacity up on the ship to be able to isolate and treat their guests and take them back to Seattle. So they're not going to, offload them and burden our very small capacity here. We required them.
That's a game changer right there. Yeah.
Yeah, I asked every cruise line if they were going to have contingency contracts in place with air ambulance services, that they do that locally. So we have a lot of air ambulance companies with pretty good capacity in Southeast Alaska, but many cruise lines, they're global companies and their contracts are with worldwide medical evacuation folks. But I asked them all to make sure that their global contracts or specific contracts were with Alaska-based airplanes or helicopters and flight medic crews. In the extreme chance that we might have to medevac somebody off. And then it's Alaska. We deal with the weather. Sometimes the planes just can't get in and get out. And our communities do an amazing job at kind of managing that chaos if the weather is our enemy.
Well, and a lot of these Southeast communities, Bryan, have a pretty good vaccination rates in the community. So you're not seeing a lot of the people who are from the community needing hospital care at this point, because all the seniors have been vaccinated. I mean, if you look at across the broad spectrum of the society, the senior citizens, they're going in, they're getting vaccinated. They know that they are the number one target for this virus. This virus wants them bad. And then down in the 55-year-olds and the 40-year-olds, and now we're seeing people get them as young as 12. Doesn't sound like we're going to be getting any kids on cruise ships this year, though, right?
So the cruise lines are still having conversations. So we think, if they're 12 and older and they're eligible for the Pfizer vaccine, then they're certainly welcome, I believe, on those cruise ships that require the vaccination. So younger than that is going to be a challenge. We're still talking to cruise lines that cater to families, if you will. And they're having direct kind of conversations with our port communities in Southeast Alaska to determine what level of vaccination is enough on a ship. So there's potential that we may see some family cruises this late summer and early fall. Not sure not quite sure about that yet, but it's definitely not off the table. They're still talking about it.
Well, this is the year if somebody wanted to cruise Alaska to do it, because the capacity is going to be reduced on the ship. So you're going to have the whole ship to yourself. I don't know how anybody's going to make any money. And when you get into port, there's only be 1 or 2 ships a day maximum. Looks like 1 ship a day in many of these ports. And you'll be able to get off, and you won't be competing throughout the town or for trips. You'll be able to do anything you want to do, because the towns are going to be wide open. You won't be crowded in. It's a good year to travel. But
yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Yeah.
There are other concerns. I was looking at, of course, the news media about Ron DeSantis and him challenging the cruise lines that they can't require a vaccine. And then the CDC said, well, that actually could impact Alaska. So what is the situation with the rules in Florida, the law that DeSantis signed, the requirement for vaccines, and CDC's decision on whether or not that would impact us? Do you know what that's at?
So yeah, I think the real crux of what's been in the mainstream media lately is the lawsuit that Governor DeSantis filed, that Governor Dunleavy joined, against the CDC. And it wasn't about vaccination. It wasn't about cruise lines requiring vaccination. It was really about CDC's kind of over heavy-handed requirements on the cruise industry. It's really the only industry in America that has been targeted as harshly with respect to the pandemic and COVID-19. No other industry has been affected like they have. And so the Florida lawsuit was really about the requirements being much too onerous for cruise companies to be able to get through. Now, the CDC, after that lawsuit was filed and with pressure from our delegation and our governor and Governor DeSantis and others, they really have taken a much more friendly approach and communicative approach with industry, which really spurred all of the cruise lines into getting a hold of me and wanting to try to save the season. Just a couple months ago, we thought the 2021 sailing season was shot as well. But they've relaxed their kind of attitude, if you will. They're very cooperative and collaborative with us now. And what's being reported in the media is that if that lawsuit goes through and an injunction is put in, then what the delegation was able to do with respect to Canada and waiving the Passenger Vessel Service Act so we can bypass Canada, there is some interpretation by a few that will jeopardize our ability to have a cruise season. And we just do not agree with that kind of legal opinion that hasn't been issued yet. We believe that we're all working very well with cruise industry. There's been a cruise ship sailing in Europe. There are some just starting in the Caribbean, and we're working well with CDC. So we think that may be overcome by events, and we'll be able to get these, kind of jump through the hoops that CDC wants, demonstrate that the cruise lines in our port communities and our state and local health officials can do this safely, and they're going to let us return. And it's not a whole season, but we're hoping it's going to be half a cruise season. And it's really what the cruise industry is telling me. It's great practice for a full and robust 2022 cruise season, where we really expect, people coming to Alaska in numbers like we haven't seen in a long time.
Oh, yeah. People are, our airports are filling up, and hotels in Anchorage are going, can't get a hotel here for less than like $300, even a Motel 6. Cars here in Anchorage are going for, $300 a day. I mean, people are coming to Alaska because we've got we do social distancing better than anybody. So they want to come up and see it now before the dam breaks and all the rest of the tourists come up. So this is fascinating. So the first ship is coming up at the end of July. Am I correct? And
yeah. So a couple of lines are looking at late July, and then a couple in August, and they're all planning out through October, even the ones that come up here in the late fall.
So I that's a little bit different, because I had not heard that the ships might be sailing as late as October, because that usually it's dark, it's stormy. We get those autumn gales through Southeast Alaska. It's not the greatest cruising weather, and you can't go out and stand around on the deck so much in the weather. But it sounds like they want to extend a little bit just to try to recoup some of their expenses. So what else do we need to know about the response that you guys have had? I mean, here I was down on the Kenai, and the people on the Kenai thought that the governor and yourself, obviously doing the work for him, have been doing a fantastic job. They had nothing but praise to say about the management of the COVID pandemic. What else do we need to know about what you've been working on with cruise ships?
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the sentiment. And really, the credit really does have to go to the governor. I think, kind of on the shore side piece of this, we've worked very, very well with port communities and the cruise industry. It's been the most, in any kind of private industry, there's lots of competition and all that, if you will, but not with respect to resuming a tourism season and a cruise ship season this year. Everybody has been completely above board. We're sharing documents. We standardized everything, and that was a tough deal. We kind of put a request out for every cruise ship company to use a standard set of safety protocols, so it was consistent for our local jurisdictions. And on the flip side, we asked every Southeast port community to have a consistent and standardized set of requirements for the cruise ships. And it was just amazing. Every mayor, city manager, borough assembly, port director, harbor master, and every cruise line around the globe came together to kind of use a standardized set of protocols to get this in place. And I mean, it's some of the most cooperative work that I've seen between public and private sector in my 26 years doing emergency stuff here in the state. But I think the other piece of it is really either the individual tourist side or the tourism workforce side. The governor has made a concerted effort not only to do the big advertising campaigns in the lower 48 and around the globe to invite people to our safe state, but we had also made it a strong priority to make vaccines available to workers, seasonal workers that are going to come up to the state. We did that very, very well with the fishing industry. And it was a model, and our communities and those folks that are doing the vaccinations at the local level, working with us at the state, have really made an effort to make that available to seasonal workers, to make sure that the folks coming up to open up those seasonal tourism businesses are, if they want the vaccine, then it's available to them, and it's readily available when they get here before the season starts. And then, of course, there's also some economic relief that is still being made available. There was we issued a release. Commissioner Crummer issued a release just last week or the week before, with some summer camp program funding from the CARES Act to make sure that parents can return to work. Those who haven't been able to work either because of seasonal or because of the pandemic, that their children have a place to go. So we've granted quite a bit of money out to the folks that run the summer camps for kids. So kids have a place to go that's going to be safe, and the parents can get back to work. So we've been working on it from all angles with a kind of single focus to safely kickstart the economy and get back to kind of how we were before COVID showed up.
So that's really interesting. So, it's true that the parents are struggling because the daycare enterprises have been so disrupted, and there's so much instability, and a lot of the daycare babysitter providers have moved off, just like the restaurant workers have moved off into other fields. They've left and they've gone to work for Costco, or they've gone to work for cars, or their jobs as stalkers seem more secure than a job as a server. And our workforce in Southeast is struggling. They can't get people to go to work in some of these places. I've got a question for you, though, about some of the travelers. When they come up, they will be vaccinated. Do they also have to wear masks when they're on board?
So on board, unfortunately, they're going to have to in most cases, and that is a federal order that's been out for a while. It's also the same one that we've been having a hard time. We've been working with the delegation. They've been trying to work with CDC to remove that mask requirement for fishermen. For us, it's a very, very serious safety concern to have fishermen on the deck of a fishing vessel or crabbing vessel wearing a mask that's wet, that they can't breathe, that they can't communicate. So unfortunately, it's a federal requirement when you're on a ship or on an airplane, on public transit and in airports and things like that, to have to still wear a mask. And I think as soon as that goes away, I think it'll be dependent on, the cruise lines, as private businesses will be able to make their own business decisions, just like they are for vaccine. And I think that's another key point. Our state's, kind of different than many others, where the governor has been very strong from the very beginning that he's not going to tell a private business what they can do or what they can't do. Similar, and there's been some challenges with, in a home rule state, that the governor hasn't told municipalities what they can or can't do. So we hope we get to that position, with respect to masks and things like that. They still are a valuable tool, and cruise ships are notorious for being, a lot of people, sometimes get sick on a cruise ship. There's just a lot of people in the buffets and that kind of thing.
Right, you get the norovirus that will go through a cruise ship. But let me tell you, with all the sanitizing that they're doing, you haven't seen the regular influenza, just because everybody's sort of social distancing, staying away, washing their hands, doing the things they ought to do to get rid of the flu virus. Norovirus might not be that big of a problem either. But I imagine that if they're on board and they are in the public spaces, they'll still have to wear the mask until we can convince the federal government that this is ridiculous. Although I don't know that anybody who's working on the cruise ships is going to be all that enforcing of it. They may just kind of look the other way. I don't know. They may be more hospitable and just say, you're vaccinated. We know you're vaccinated, and this is a ridiculous rule. I don't know. On the airplanes, we're seeing a lot of enforcement, and it's gotten very, very heavy-handed. But it's hard to say. The cruise ships might just take a lighter touch with it.
Yeah, I really think we'll see similar to what I'm seeing now when I'm out in the stores in South Central. When when mask requirements or mandates were lifted at the local level, there were still some stores, some restaurants, and some stores that, as employers, required masking. So you saw a lot of the employees, wearing a mask, even though as just a client of the store or the restaurant or whatever, you could go in and it was optional to use. So, I expect we'll see a gradual reduction in that and get to the point where, if you feel comfortable wearing a mask, then have at it. And if you don't, then don't. Kind of the same thing the governor's been saying about vaccine. It's a personal health decision.
Right. Well, listen, for those who are listening in today, we really appreciate having Bryan Fisher here with us. He's with the acting director of the Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, and he's been with the division for 26 years. That means he's been through earthquakes and fires and floods. You've seen it all, from the big floods on the Yukon, the Kuskokwim, fires on the Kenai and up in Delta. The earthquakes that you have had to manage. So now you're having to manage the big thing that you probably never really thought you'd ever have to manage, which is a pandemic. And we really appreciate you coming on with us today, Bryan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suzanne.
And for everybody else, just be sure to tune in midweek for the Must Read Alaska podcast. It's always up by Thursday morning. Scott is our host for that podcast. He always does a great job. It's got good content. There's a lot to talk about, so don't miss out on the Thursday morning podcast. You can also check with us on Facebook. We'll be doing some live streaming tomorrow. I know that the mayor-elect Mayor-elect Bronson will have some announcements to make tomorrow, that he'll be announcing some of the appointments to his organization there as he starts to take over the government in Anchorage. And if you're a supporter of Must Read Alaska, I just want to thank you so much. You make it possible for this little enterprise to stand up for what's right in Alaska. If you'd like to support us, just hit that donate button on the right side of mustreadalaska.com. And that way we'll stay independent, we'll stay thoughtful, and against that big liberal activist news media that we all know way too well. So until next time, everybody, I'm signing off. I'm Suzanne Downing from somewhere in Alaska.